Hi, I'm Josh, and I read 105 books last year. As reading is something that really enriches my life, I wanted to share with all of you just some tips for you to be able to read more in 2021. So what follows are my top 10 tips for you to read more in the year 2021. Let's roll the intro. Oh wait, there's no intro. This really isn't a channel. I might make it into one if enough people like these videos. So hit like and subscribe below. You can even hit the little bell icon. It'll tell you when another video pops up. I'm only planning 2 videos at this point. We'll see if people, like what I'm doing here. So, let me know that in the comments as well. Just be nice. This is my first shot at this, and I'm just using my laptop webcam and a lapel mic. So, nothing high tech here. So I've always been a reader. But never 105 books a year. And it wasn't just because we lived through a global pandemic with social distancing and so forth. Over the last 20 years, I've gone from probably a 15 to 20 book reader all the way up to consistently over the last few years about 70 to 90 books a year. So the things on this list are things that I've personally done in order to go from someone who was, a more than casual reader, but to someone who reads, significant amount of books throughout the year. So I hope that if you're a new reader or someone who's had a reading hiatus, a lot of these will probably help you. But even those of you that have read 40 or 50 books a year and you just want to read like 10 more, I think you might get 1 or 2 points from this video, might be of some help for you. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So number one thing that I did was I make a routine out of it. I think in life, routines are very good, and it's a way to do things without having the conscious thought and decision-making process for the things that we want to do. For instance, I'm a runner, so 5-6 days a week, my alarm goes off between 4 and 5 a.m. I'm up and I'm out the door and I take a run. People ask me how I'm able to do that, and there's no conscious thought there. It's just part of what I do. Same thing with reading. I start my day with a run and I end my day with a book. So, the last hour of the day or more, oftentimes very much more, my nose is in a book. And there's not a conscious, it's 8:30, I need to open up a book and read. It's part of my routine and it just happens. So what I would recommend is find a time of day that works for you pretty much every day, that you can consistently carve out to read. And even if you only do that, if you're a new reader and this is the only point that you do out of these 10, if you do 20 minutes a day the rest of the year, you'll read at least a book a month. So, carve out some time and make it a routine, and that's my first tip. All right, number 2. So, do you like things that are fun? I like things that are fun. Fun kind of rules, Reading is fun. And one of the joys of reading for me is when I get totally immersed in a story and the world disappears around me. So in order to have that fun, you have to cut out some distractions in your life. This is your number one distraction. We are kind of addicted to these things. So what I've done with my phone when I'm reading is I usually try to put it in the other room. At the bare minimum, try to turn your notifications off. If you're someone that has to be reached, maybe put it in the other room so that you can only hear it when it rings or an important message comes through. But the immersion portion of reading is such a joy. The less that you have that phone as a potential distraction, the more fun you can have by immersing yourself in whatever it is that you're reading. All right, number 3. So more distracting talk. I remember when I was in college, I had a musicology professor freshman year I found particularly inspiring, that one day he was giving us a lecture on how hard we had to work to be successful in our field, and we had to be totally focused and eliminate all distractions. And he said, and then I'll never forget, he stuck his hand in the air and he said, and television is the greatest of all distractions. Now, to fast forward, this was sometime in the 90s. I won't say what year to show how old I am, but fast forward this to 2021, I'd say television or however it is you consume visual media can be a distraction. Now, before you think I'm just some dork that only reads and doesn't watch any TV or anything like that, that's not the case. I am a dork, but not for those reasons. I got a great TV in the next room. I love watching, especially television dramas, serialized ones. I love watching sports. I consume a good amount of TV, probably, maybe as much as anybody does. But the big habit I changed, and this was about 15, maybe even 20 years ago, I made this change, is back when I had cable, I stopped flipping channels. So I guess the modern day equivalent to that is, I don't waste 30 minutes on Netflix trying to find something to watch. The biggest change in my viewing habits with my television is that every time I turn my TV on, I know exactly what I'm going to watch and for about how long. I say for about how long because sometimes, you get sucked into another episode and it just goes on a little longer than you intended. But I don't waste time flipping channels or wasting, 30 minutes on Hulu trying to find the next show to watch. So I've been just more efficient with those habits. So again, that leaves more time for me to read. When I made that change, and that change alone is the first year that I read 40 books in a year. And that was up from about 15 or 20. So that's something that I know works really, really well. And hopefully it'll work for you as well. All right, number 4. So number 4, hey, it's Editor Josh here. Number 4 was pretty bad. So when I made my top 10 list, I had 9, and then I had to kind of force one, and that became the 4th one on this list. And then when I watched my video, I thought it was kind of lame. So I'm just going to cut it out of there. So if you have a good idea when you get to the end of this video, just tell me in the comments what you think number 4 should have been. Hopefully it isn't the same thing that I thought was lame that I cut out. Back to the list. All right, number 5. Had to get some props for number 5. So I wanted to address just briefly the medium in which you read, because I think that affects how much you can read in a year. This is especially important for those of you that are not big readers, but I think it could be equally important for those of you that are readers. This point and the next point are kind of related. So I want to talk about physical books versus Kindle or e-reader, tablet or phone or audiobook, okay? So let's talk about audiobook first. People have asked me, does an audiobook count? And I say, of course it counts. If it's an unabridged version, I think you can count it as a book read. Now, if you want to get technical, yeah, somebody's reading it to you instead of you physically reading it. But the thing is, if you listen to the audiobook and I read the book, chances are we can talk about that book on the same level. So you're experiencing everything, even if you're not actively engaged in the act of reading. So I think audiobooks count. A lot of people love them. I don't like them as much just because they take longer. For instance, the biggest book I read last year, I read War and Peace by Tolstoy. And it took me, I think, on about 30 hours total to read the book. The audiobook is like 60 hours. So, the sheer amount of time for me to read is a lot quicker than an audiobook, unless I speed it up, but I don't like to ruin, the great work that these voice actors do with audiobooks. But audiobooks are great. If that's how you read best, do it. All right, I want to discuss reading on your phone versus your iPad. I don't know where mine is right now, or other tablet, or a dedicated e-reader like my Kindle. First of all, I do not recommend the tablet or the phone. Now, stop. I know you, miss, I read 40 books last year on my tablet, who's about to come at me in all caps in the comments. This one isn't necessarily for you. Although I would argue that if you switch to an e-reader, you would read 50 books instead of 40 next year. So don't come at me yet. Wait until I'm done, and then if you want to still come at me, go for it. So first of all, let's talk about the similarities between all of them. First of all 3 are very portable. I mean, the phone obviously wins the portability. The Kindle can go in a small bag or even a large pocket. And the tablet can go in a small bag as well. So they're all equally portable. And you would say the phone is probably the best of that, and it's also pretty much probably attached to your hip anyway. So you always have it with you. So that's great. I also like from all of these devices how you can just easily get content, whether you're purchasing something or you can get something from your library with just a couple clicks and it's on your device. Portability is supreme. It's definitely better than a physical book. So those are great. But the couple differences between the Kindle and the tablet or the phone, which I think makes the Kindle or another e-reader far superior. First of all, it's the surface. I find in reading a tablet or a phone for any amount of time that there's a screen glare. I know they've improved the reading apps quite a bit over the last few years, but I still feel that, I can't read for more than an hour on those devices. I just get a little bit of an eye strain. I never get that with my Kindle unless I'm using the backlight, which you don't always have to use anyway. So I think that's one reason why a Kindle's better. And the other one is what I've already talked about with distractions. If you're reading on your phone, you're holding your distraction. Now, maybe you're one of the few that are able to just entirely, put it on airplane mode or do not disturb. That's great. You still have to resist the urge to close that reading app and open up your Instagram. So for those reasons, I would recommend the e-reader. I think it's just a better device because it's designed exactly for that. And you don't have that distraction in your hand and that temptation to go scroll, 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 scroll for your social media app of choice. Okay, so that's why I'd recommend those. I would say of my books last year, I probably read probably about 30% of my books on my Kindle, 25, 30%, something like that. There's just something about a physical book that I think is just a better reading experience. Physical book has, great cover art. It's got flaps. If you have books that have, maps in it and things, it's so much easier to reference that than on a little phone screen or a black and white Kindle screen or even on that tablet screen. It's just so much easier to look at these things on a physical book. And then there's a more aesthetically pleasing experience for me at just the page versus the cold electronic copy that you're reading with your Kindle or iPad or whatever. But there's two reasons where I do say, just not aesthetics, that the book is a superior thing to read. One has to do, if you've ever read any books that have footnotes or endnotes. Anytime you have to reference somewhere else in the book, that can be downright infuriating in an electronic copy. Let me use the War and Peace example. The War and Peace had both footnotes and endnotes. It had footnotes when it was translating the French into English, if you have a good translator like the one I had. Some of them actually leave it in French, which means like 3% of the book you can't read. Anyway, that aside, if you have a book with footnotes and endnotes, it's so much easier to reference when you can just look at it, or you can keep, for like what I did for endnotes, I had a bookmark in the back that I could easily flip to it and see what the endnotes are. A lot of times in the electronic copies, they're not referenced properly. You may go to the endnote and it may not take you back to the right spot, and then you're searching through. Again, this video is all about tips to read more, and I think a lot of books you're going to read a lot more efficiently with a physical copy than those copies. The other thing is, and I asked my book club about this one because I didn't know if it was just me. I consider myself a pretty astute reader. However, there's times where, I might miss something or I might gloss over a big point and think it was a minor point. I may want to flip back. I find that that's a huge challenge in the electronic devices. First of all, a Kindle screen is about 1/3 to a half of a page. So when you're flipping back a couple pages, it's quite a bit more. But even more than that, because of that, most of the pages look exactly the same on those devices. And I know that oftentimes when I'm reading a real book, when I'm going back, I can usually remember if it was a left or a right-hand page, top or bottom of the page, what the page looked like, if it was in the midst of a big paragraph or a series of dialogue. And I find that just a whole lot easier to go back to in a real book, where I can't do that in an electronic book. So again, it's just a lot more efficient. The last part of it, you look behind me, I really feel that a bookshelf is some of the best home decor that you can have. Especially a bookshelf full of books you've actually read. Right behind me, I have another shelf here. Hundreds of conversation starters with people for books that you may have in common or they may ask you about. All right, well, we're halfway there. The last 5 are a lot quicker. But thanks for sticking around so far, because I think 7 and 8 are the most important points on this list. All right, number 6. So number 6 is mix up your media. I know a lot of people that will read a physical book, whether it's an electronic or real book, but they'll also do the audiobook. So they can be reading and then they want to stop and make dinner. They can put on the audiobook and keep, consuming the content. Or people that have commutes will often do that. Listen to the audiobook during the commute and then, go back to reading when they're able to. So that works really well. I don't do that very often because I don't do much with audiobooks. I did 2 audiobooks last year. But I do, sometimes I'll mix a physical copy of a book with an electronic version of a book. If I'm able to get the electronic version for free through my library, I do this a lot. A couple reasons. First of all, you see up over my shoulder, Wheel of Time. I read that last year. It's 15 books and some of them are heavy. And, sitting and reading for 3 hours at a time, sometimes it was nice to just put that big book down for a chapter or 2 and read on my Kindle just because it was a lot lighter. Or it's also nice to be able to maybe, put the Kindle down when I'm having a meal and read a chapter as I'm eating. Things like that work really, really well. Or just the portability factor is really great. If you're standing in line at the DMV or the doctor's office or something, you have an electronic copy, you can pull that up, knock off a chapter or 2. So again, it's a way for you to consume more is to kind of mix these medias. All right, number 7, I think, is the most important one on this list, especially for those of you that are new readers or getting back into the reading game. Number 7, read what you want to read. Don't read what you think you should read or what someone tells you you should read. Read what you really most want to read. There's a series of commercials going around. I think it's Geico, and it's a guy who's a life coach. And he's coaching these young adults how to not be their parents. And it's a really funny set of commercials. I love the one in the hardware store. But anyway, there's one where a young man's sitting on the couch. He's got a book in his lap. And the life coach is behind him. And he says, "So, who reads books about submarines?" And the young man says, "My dad." And life coach says, "Yeah." No! What's wrong with him reading about submarines? You want to read about submarines, read about submarines. Don't let somebody tell you that what you want to read about is somehow wrong. If submarines are your thing, just go read a bunch of books about submarines. I think I've only read one. Hunt for Red October was a good one. But find all those books, research, find the best submarine books you can find and read them. The first year I read 50 books in a year, I had a friend that read 40 and she said that it doesn't count because they're YA. Why doesn't it count? If that's what you enjoy reading, read it. If YA is your thing, read YA. If submarines are your thing, read submarines. Read submarines. Read books about submarines. Oh my goodness. If trashy romance novels are your thing, go buy all those little paperbacks with the Fabio guy on the cover and read them all. Don't let anybody tell you what you should be reading or should not be reading. You do what you want to do and read what you want to read most. All right, had to stop the camera. Got a little riled up. I'm better now. So number 8 is most important for those of you that are already in a pretty good routine or for the newbies that get in and find the genre that they like. Branch out. The one thing that I know for certain of all of this is I would not have read 105 books last year had I not read 10 or more different genres of books. I find that there's just a mental and intellectual stimulus that happens when I read a different genre from either what I'm accustomed to or comfortable with. So I would really recommend branching out. Let me give you as an example. I mentioned Wheel of Time up there. So Wheel of Time has kind of instilled in me just a love of a genre that I loved as a youth, which was epic fantasy. And I hadn't read that except for A Song of Ice and Fire probably much in the last 20 years because I did branch out to a lot of other genres that I liked, the classics and thrillers and things like that. Well, I'm really excited to get back into this genre again after a bit of a break, so to speak. But I can't read nothing but epic fantasy. Even when I read Wheel of Time, I knew well enough that I would read one of those big doorstops, 800 pages on average, and then I would put another kind of book in between. And what happened is it kind of cleansed my palate, kind of like the piece of bread at the wine tasting. And what it also allowed me to do is after I branched away from the genre that I was enjoying most, when I came back to these Wheel of Time books, I was really excited, had a renewed enthusiasm that might not have been there had I not stepped away briefly. And I know for certain that it helped me read faster this year. So what I would recommend in branching out, if you're have never branched out from your genre or you're a little hesitant to do so and unsure where to go, what I recommend is finding a place that's pretty closely related. So find something tangential to what you normally read and go that direction. So for instance, if you're a nonfiction reader, find some historical fiction of an era that you enjoy reading about. That may be something that you really, really enjoy. If you're someone who's really been in the last 15 years, all this dystopian fiction that's been out there, dystopian fiction is really a form of science fiction. So maybe pick up some classic sci-fi and see if you enjoy that. But I really find that the variety of what I read really makes me able to consume a lot more books, and I think it'll help you as well. All right, number 9. So number 9, I mentioned on number 7, basically you, do your thing. Number 9, when you get to a genre that you really, really like, that's when you can start taking advice. I would not take just general book advice from anybody. From me, from a literary critic, from your cousin who read 200 books last year. Don't take general advice. But within a certain genre, if someone is well read in that genre, they can probably steer you into some good directions. I'll use myself as an example. I mentioned I hadn't read much epic fantasy in the last 20 years, aside from George R.R. Martin. Finding the booktubers that talk about fantasy quite a bit, and I see these names, Brandon Sanderson and Joe Abercrombie, and all these guys that I had not read until now. I know that's a good place to start. When I started branching out to Russian literature about 10 years ago, I just asked my friend Jeff, and he gave me some great advice, starting reading that material. So find someone who's an expert in that. Not just someone who reads, but who's specific in that genre, and they can often point you into some cool directions. All right, number 10, here we go. It seems like semantics, but don't find time to read. Make time to read. Again, you've watched this whole video, these 10 points. You obviously want to read more next year, unless you're just someone that happens to know me and you're helping my analytics. If that's the case, thank you. But you're probably here because you want to read more. So make time. Don't find time. Let me give you a exaggerated example. I have friends that work 78 hours a week and are amazing parents. No one ever said, well, how do you find time for your kids? Because that's stupid. It's important, so they make time for their kids. Same thing with your reading. If reading is something that's important for you to do more, make time for it. Now, your making time may only be 15, 20 minutes a day. It may not be a couple hours like some others. But I promise you, however much time that you do make for reading, your life will be further enriched by it. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I'm going to leave it right there. Please hit like and subscribe. You can hit the bell icon, get a notification when I do drop my top 10 books I read in 2020. Some really, really good ones. Will Wheel of Time make the list? Who knows? You'll have to come back and see that. Hope you enjoyed this video. Goodbye. Happy reading in 2021.